My mom gave all of my deceased dad's inheritance to her new boyfriend, and now she's asking me for rent money. Hey Reddit. William here, 32 years old. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the mess my family has become, and honestly, I need to vent and maybe get some outside perspective. This is a long one, so bear with me. It all started last year. My dad, Robert, bless his soul, passed away after a short battle with illness. It was tough, obviously. Dad was the rock of our family. He was married to my mom, Corinne, for over 30 years, and they had a good life. My sister, Elizabeth, 29, and I are both adults now, living our own lives, but we were always close to our parents. Dad was a smart man. He had built a successful small business over the years, and while we weren't rich, he was financially comfortable and had planned well for retirement and for us. When he passed, it turned out he had a pretty decent estate. Nothing crazy like millions, but enough that it would certainly make a difference, especially for Mom. We're talking about the house, his savings, some investments, life insurance policies, the whole shebang. The will reading was, well, it was an experience. It was about a month after Dad passed. Me, Elizabeth, and Mom were all there with Dad's lawyer, Mr. Henderson. It was somber, as you can imagine. We were all still grieving. I honestly just wanted it over with. I figured it would be pretty straightforward. Dad was always fair and logical. I expected a simple split, maybe Mom getting the majority, which would be totally fine, and Elizabeth and I getting a share too. But oh boy, was I wrong. Mr. Henderson started reading the will, and it was all standard legal stuff until he got to the part about the beneficiaries. And that's when things took a turn. Dad had left everything, and I mean everything, to Mom, Corinne, 100%. Elizabeth and I exchanged a look. We were surprised, to say the least. Not that we were greedy, but it was unexpected. I kind of assumed he would at least split some portion between us kids. Elizabeth looked just as confused as I felt. Mom, on the other hand, just sat there, looking kind of blank. After Mr. Henderson finished, there was this awkward silence. Finally, Elizabeth spoke up very gently. "Mom, are you okay? That's a lot." Mom just shrugged. "Yeah, well, Robert always took care of me." She said it in this flat tone, like she was reading from a script. It felt weird. I know Mom was grieving, but this felt different. I jumped in. "Mom, we're happy for you, of course, but did Dad ever talk to you about his plans for the inheritance? Did he mention anything to you about Elizabeth and me?" She looked at me almost like she was annoyed. "William, your father made his wishes clear in the will. It's all there. I'm the beneficiary, end of story." Okay, that was definitely not the Mom I knew. My mom, Corinne, was always warm, kind, and generous. This felt cold, very cold. Elizabeth, being the braver one, pressed further. "Mom, it's just, Dad always talked about wanting to help us out, with our futures. He always said he wanted to leave something for us." Mom sighed dramatically. "Well, he changed his mind, didn't he? It's in the will. Are you questioning your father's wishes?" She was getting defensive and honestly a bit snappy. It was making me uncomfortable. Mr. Henderson, bless his heart, tried to smooth things over. "Ladies, William, your father's will is legally sound and very clear. Mrs. Mom's last name, you are the sole beneficiary. There's no ambiguity here. He was right legally, but emotionally, morally, it felt off." Elizabeth and I decided to drop it for then. We didn't want to argue with Mom right after Dad's passing and at the will reading itself. We figured we'd talk to her privately later. So, fast forward a few weeks. Life was slowly starting to settle into a new normal, or as normal as it could be without Dad. Mom was different. She seemed distant, preoccupied. She wasn't really talking to Elizabeth or me much. She'd answer our calls, but conversations were short and surface level. Then Elizabeth called me, sounding really worried. "William, have you talked to Mom lately? She sounds strange." I told her I had talked to Mom a few days ago, but yeah, she seemed a little off. "What's up?" Elizabeth hesitated. "Well, I went over to her house yesterday to drop off some groceries, just to check in. And there was a man there. A man. At Mom's house? Who? Elizabeth lowered her voice even though we were on the phone. I don't know. I've never seen him before. He was there. And Mom was acting all giggly, like a teenager. It was so weird, William, so soon after Dad. My stomach dropped. Oh no, 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 it couldn't be, could it? Mom dating. Already. It had only been a few months since Dad died. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a friend, a neighbor, someone helping her with something around the house. But Elizabeth's tone, it didn't sound like that. I decided to go over to Mom's myself the next day. I just needed to see for myself. I told Mom I was coming over for lunch. She agreed, but she sounded less than enthusiastic. When I got to her house, there was a car in the driveway that I didn't recognize. A shiny new kind of flashy sports car. Definitely not Mom's style. Definitely not Dad's style either. I rang the doorbell and Mom opened the door. She was different. She was dressed up, wearing makeup, which she hadn't really bothered with much since Dad's passing. And she had this almost giddy smile on her face. "William, so good to see you. Come in, come in." She ushered me inside, and then I saw him. Sitting on the living room couch was a man I had never seen before in my life. He was maybe in his late 50s, early 60s, slicked back hair, wearing a gold chain and a very, very white smile. He stood up when he saw me and Mom made the introductions. "William, this is Richard." "Richard, this is my son, William." Richard stepped forward and shook my hand, a little too enthusiastically. "Pleasure to meet you, William. Your mother has told me so much about you." I managed a weak smile. "Nice to meet you too, Richard." "So Richard, how do you know Mom?" Mom jumped in before Richard could answer. "Oh, Richard and I met recently. He's been a wonderful support to me." She gave Richard this sickeningly sweet smile that made my teeth hurt. "Support? What kind of support? And recently?" How recently? My alarm bells were ringing like crazy. We sat down for lunch, which Mom had actually cooked, which was also unusual lately. Richard was chatty, very chatty. He talked about himself mostly. His businesses, his travels, his boat. He mentioned his boat a lot. Apparently he had a yacht, a really, really nice yacht. He kept calling Mom Karen very casually and putting his hand on her arm. It was making me increasingly uncomfortable. Throughout lunch, Mom was just different. She was laughing at Richard's jokes, even when they weren't funny. She was hanging on his every word. It was like she had transformed into a completely different person. The Mom I knew was still grieving, quiet and reserved. This Mom was bubbly and almost giddy. It was jarring. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. After lunch, when Richard went to the restroom, I turned to Mom. "Mom, who is this guy? Seriously, and how long have you known him?" Mom's smile faltered a bit. "William, don't be like that. Richard is a very nice man, and we're getting to know each other. Getting to know each other. Mom, Dad died like 3 months ago. 3 months, and you're dating already." With this guy, Mom bristled. "William, it's my life. I'm a grown woman, your father is gone, I'm lonely. Richard is a comfort to me. Is that so wrong? Comfort. Mom, he's talking about his yacht and his businesses and flashing his gold chain. He seems like a gold digger, Mom, to be honest. And you just inherited a lot of money. Don't you see how this looks?" Mom actually gasped. "William, how dare you? Richard is not a gold digger. He's a successful businessman. He doesn't need my money. And for your information, he doesn't even know about the inheritance." "Oh, for real? He doesn't know about the inheritance? Mom, come on. Do you really believe that? He seems to know an awful lot about you in a very short amount of time. And that car he's driving, that screams I'm trying to impress someone with money." Mom crossed her arms and glared at me. "You're being judgmental, William. You don't know Richard. You're just jealous because I'm moving on with my life. You want me to be miserable forever. Is that what you want?" "No, Mom, that's not what I want. I want you to be happy, but I also want you to be smart and safe. And this feels rushed and wrong. And frankly, it feels disrespectful to Dad's memory." Mom's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't you dare talk about your father. You have no right to judge me. I'm your mother, and I deserve to be happy." And with that, she stormed off, leaving me standing there, feeling like I had just walked into a brick wall. Richard came back from the restroom looking confused. "Everything okay?" he asked, all fake concern. "Yeah, everything's just great," I said, forcing a smile. "I should probably get going, Mom, Richard. Thanks for lunch." I left Mom's house feeling sick to my stomach. This was bad, really bad. My mom, the sensible, practical woman I knew, was acting completely out of character. And this Richard guy, he just radiated red flags. I called Elizabeth immediately and told her everything. She was just as horrified as I was. "Oh my God, William, this is a disaster. We need to do something." We talked for a long time, brainstorming what we could do. We considered talking to Mom again, but after her reaction at lunch, we knew that wouldn't work. She was completely smitten with this Richard guy and wasn't going to listen to anything we said against him. Then Elizabeth had an idea. Maybe we should talk to Mr. Henderson, Dad's lawyer. Maybe there was something in the will we missed. Or maybe he had some advice on how to handle this situation. It was a long shot, but we were desperate. We called Mr. Henderson and explained the situation. He was very sympathetic and agreed to meet with us. We met with Mr. Henderson a few days later. We told him about Richard, about Mom's sudden change in behavior, about our concerns about the inheritance. Mr. Henderson listened patiently, his expression growing more serious as we spoke. After we finished, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I understand your concerns, William, Elizabeth, and I must say this is unfortunate." He paused. "Legally, your mother is the sole beneficiary of your father's estate. She has the right to do whatever she wants with the money. There's nothing you can do to legally stop her from spending it, even if it's on this, Richard." My heart sank. So we were powerless. Mom could just blow through Dad's entire life savings on this guy, and there was nothing we could do about it. "Not necessarily," Mr. Henderson said, holding up a hand. "There's nothing you can do to stop her directly. But there might be something else." He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Your father, Robert, was a good man, a very prudent man. And while his will is legally sound and it does leave everything to your mother, there were conversations." He looked at us pointedly. "Conversations we had before he passed, about his wishes for his estate, beyond what's written in the will." Elizabeth and I exchanged excited glances. "What kind of conversations?" I asked, my voice hopeful. Mr. Henderson hesitated. "Robert was concerned about your mother's financial judgment. He loved her dearly, of course, but he knew she could be impulsive, especially when it came to money. He was worried that if he left her a large sum of money outright, she might not manage it wisely. He wanted to ensure that she was taken care of for the rest of her life, but he also wanted to make sure that some of his estate would eventually benefit you both, his children." "So, what did he do?" Elizabeth asked, leaning forward. Mr. Henderson smiled slightly. "Robert was a clever man. He created a trust, a revocable living trust. The will simply pours all of his assets into this trust, and your mother, Karen, is the trustee and the primary beneficiary. She has access to the income from the trust, and she can even access the principal under certain circumstances, for her health, education, maintenance, and support." Standard language. "Okay," I said, still not quite understanding. "But she still controls everything, right? She can still spend it all." "Not exactly," Mr. Henderson said, shaking his head. "The trust document, which is separate from the will, contains specific instructions. And while your mother is the trustee now, there are successor trustees named in the document, and there are stipulations about how the trust assets are to be managed and distributed." "Successor trustees?" I asked. "Who are they?" Mr. Henderson smiled again. "You are William, and Elizabeth. You are named as co-successor trustees to take over management of the trust in the event your mother is unable or unwilling to continue as trustee." Elizabeth and I were stunned. Dad had done this. He had planned for this. He had known Mom well enough to realize she might need some protection from herself. Mr. Henderson continued, "And there's more. The trust document also specifies that upon your mother's passing, any remaining assets in the trust are to be divided equally between you and Elizabeth. So while she has access to the funds now, it's not unlimited access, and it's not solely hers to do with as she pleases. The ultimate beneficiaries are you and Elizabeth. This was incredible. Dad had thought of everything. He had provided for Mom, but he had also protected his legacy for us. It was like he was still looking out for us, even from beyond the grave. Mr. Henderson explained that while Mom had control of the trust now, as trustees, Elizabeth and I had certain rights and responsibilities. We could request accountings of the trust assets. We could inquire about how the funds were being managed. And if we had reason to believe that Mom was mismanaging the trust or acting against its best interests, we could petition the court to have her removed as trustee and have ourselves appointed as successor trustees. Mismanaging the trust, acting against its best interests, spending it all on a gold-digging boyfriend and a yacht. That definitely seemed like mismanaging the trust to me. We thanked Mr. Henderson profusely. He had given us a glimmer of hope. We still had a long way to go, but at least we knew we weren't completely powerless. Elizabeth and I decided to take action. We started by sending a formal letter to Mom through Mr. Henderson requesting an accounting of the trust assets. We were entitled to this information as successor beneficiaries. Mom was furious when she received the letter. She called me, screaming, "William, what is the meaning of this? Are you questioning my management of the trust? Do you not trust me?" "Your own mother." "Mom, it's not about trust," I said calmly, trying to keep my voice even. "It's about responsibility. We're just exercising our rights as successor beneficiaries to understand how the trust is being managed. It's standard procedure." "Standard procedure," she scoffed. "You're doing this because of Richard, aren't you? You don't like him, so you're trying to control my money. You're just like your father, always trying to control me." "Mom, that's not fair," I said, my voice rising. "Dad was not trying to control you. He was trying to protect you. And frankly, Mom, your behavior lately has been concerning. You've changed. You're acting impulsively. And this Richard guy." "Don't you dare talk about Richard," she shrieked. "He's wonderful, he's kind, he's generous, he's nothing like your father, generous. Mom, he's probably using you. Have you even thought about that? He's probably after your money, that's enough," Mom yelled. "I don't want to hear another word about Richard. And I'm not giving you any accounting. It's none of your business how I spend my money. It's mine. Your father left it to me." "Mom, it's not entirely yours," I said, trying to keep my cool. "The trust is set up for your benefit, yes, but it's also meant to benefit Elizabeth and me eventually. And we have a right to make sure it's being managed responsibly." I hung up before she could explode again. It was clear that talking to Mom was not going to work. She was completely blinded by this Richard guy and was refusing to see reason. But we had the letter out there, the formal request for an accounting, and legally she had to comply. Eventually, after some more back and forth through Mr. Henderson, Mom reluctantly provided a partial accounting. It was vague and incomplete, but it was enough to raise some serious red flags. We could see large sums of money being withdrawn from the trust account. Cash withdrawals, wire transfers, checks made out to Richard, and for vague descriptions like personal expenses and gifts. Gifts to Richard, using Dad's inheritance. This was outrageous. Elizabeth and I confronted Mom again, this time with the accounting in hand. We went to her house, unannounced, and sat her down in the living room. Richard was conveniently absent. "Mom, we need to talk," Elizabeth said, her voice firm but gentle. "We've seen the accounting, and we're very concerned." "Concerned about what?" Mom asked, trying to play it cool, but I could see the nervousness in her eyes. "Concerned about where Dad's money is going," I said, holding up the accounting statement. "Mom, there are thousands of dollars being withdrawn here going to Richard. What is this for?" Mom shrugged. It's my money. I can spend it how I want. Richard has been helping me out. He's been managing some things for me. Managing things." "Like what?" Elizabeth asked skeptically. Managing to spend your inheritance. Mom glared at Elizabeth. Don't be disrespectful. Richard is a businessman. He knows about investments. He's helping me make smart choices. Smart choices. Mom, you're giving him thousands of dollars in cash. That's not smart. That's reckless. And it's our dad's money, money he worked his whole life for. Mom's voice started to rise. It's my money now. Robert left it to me. And Richard deserves it. He makes me happy, something none of you ever did. That was a low blow. Elizabeth and I exchanged hurt looks. Mom, that's not true, Elizabeth said, her voice trembling slightly. We love you, Mom. We just want what's best for you, and for Dad's legacy. Well, you have a funny way of showing it. Mom snapped. You're just trying to control me. You're jealous of Richard. You want to take away my happiness. Mom, we're not jealous of Richard, I said, trying to stay calm. We're worried about you. And we're worried about Dad's money. Because it's disappearing, Mom, it's going fast, and we have a feeling Richard is behind it. Mom stood up abruptly. Get out of my house. I don't want to hear another word from either of you. You're both ungrateful, selfish children. Get out, she was practically screaming at us, her face red with rage. There was no reasoning with her. We had hit a wall again. We left Mom's house feeling defeated and heartbroken. She was so completely under Richard's spell that she was willing to destroy her relationship with us, her own children, for him. And she was throwing away Dad's hard-earned money in the process. We knew we had to take more drastic action. We went back to Mr. Henderson and told him everything. He listened, his expression grim. I'm afraid it's time to consider petitioning the court to have your mother removed as trustee, he said finally. Based on what you've told me, and the partial accounting, there's a strong case to be made that she is breaching her fiduciary duties as trustee. She is not acting in the best interests of the trust, and she is potentially mismanaging and dissipating the trust assets. Petitioning the court, it sounded so serious, so drastic, but we were out of options. We couldn't just stand by and watch Mom ruin her life and Dad's legacy. We agreed to proceed with the petition. Mr. Henderson prepared the legal documents, outlining our concerns and providing evidence of Mom's questionable spending. It was a formal legal action, and it was going to be messy and public, but we felt we had no choice. The legal process was slow and stressful. Mom was served with the petition, and predictably she went ballistic. She called us, sent us angry texts, even showed up at my house screaming and crying. She accused us of betraying her, of ruining her life, of being greedy and heartless. It was awful. It tore our family apart even further, but we stood our ground. We knew we were doing the right thing, even if it was incredibly painful. The court hearing was set for a few months later. It was a tense and emotional day. Mom showed up with Richard, of course. He looked smug and confident, like he owned the place. Mom looked pale and drawn, but still defiant. Mr. Henderson presented our case to the judge, laying out the evidence of Mom's spending and her relationship with Richard. He argued that Mom was not acting responsibly as trustee and was jeopardizing the trust assets. He asked the court to remove her as trustee and appoint Elizabeth and me as successor co-trustees. Mom's lawyer argued that she was a competent adult, capable of managing her own finances. He tried to downplay the spending on Richard, claiming they were just gifts from a generous friend. He even tried to argue that we were interfering with Mom's personal life and trying to control her. Then, Mom took the stand. She was tearful and emotional. She claimed that Richard was her soulmate, her rock, her everything. She said he had helped her through the darkest time of her life after Dad's death. She insisted that he wasn't after her money, that he loved her for herself. She painted herself as a victim, a lonely widow being persecuted by her own children. It was a performance, a carefully crafted sob story, and for a moment I actually felt a pang of guilt. Was I being too harsh on Mom? Was I misjudging Richard? Maybe she was truly happy with him, maybe I was just being controlling. But then Richard took the stand, and that's when everything changed. Richard was smooth and charming at first. He talked about his successful businesses, his yacht, his luxurious lifestyle. He claimed he didn't need Mom's money, that he was financially independent. He said he was with Mom because he loved her, not for her inheritance. But under cross-examination by Mr. Henderson, Richard started to crack. Mr. Henderson asked him about specific financial transactions, about the large cash withdrawals, the checks made out to him. Richard became evasive, defensive. He couldn't explain where the money had gone. He stumbled over his words, his smooth facade crumbling. Then Mr. Henderson dropped the bombshell. He produced evidence that Richard was not a successful businessman at all. In fact, he was deeply in debt. His businesses were failing. His yacht was heavily mortgaged. He was being sued by creditors. He was, in fact, a con man, a professional gold digger. The courtroom went silent. Even Mom looked shocked. Richard's face went white. He stammered, tried to deny it, but the evidence was overwhelming. Mr. Henderson had done his homework. He had uncovered Richard's entire financial history, and it was a disaster. The judge looked at Richard with disgust. And then she turned to Mom. "Mrs. Mom's last name, are you aware of Mr. Richard's financial situation? Are you aware that he is deeply in debt and potentially defrauding you?" Mom looked bewildered, her eyes wide with disbelief. No, I didn't know." She looked at Richard, her expression changing from love and trust to confusion and then to dawning horror. The judge didn't need to say anything more. The truth was out in the open. Richard was exposed for who he really was, and Mom was finally forced to face reality. The judge ruled in our favor. She removed Mom as trustee of the trust and appointed Elizabeth and me as co-successor trustees. Mom was devastated. Richard was furious. He stormed out of the courtroom, leaving Mom behind. That was the last time we ever saw him. The aftermath was messy and painful. Mom was heartbroken and humiliated. She finally realized she had been completely taken in by Richard. She had been blinded by loneliness and desperation, and she had made a terrible mistake. It took a long time for Mom to come to terms with what had happened. She was angry at Richard, of course, but she was also angry at herself for being so foolish. And she was angry at Elizabeth and me for taking legal action against her. But slowly, over time, things started to heal. Elizabeth and I were patient and supportive. We didn't gloat or say, "I told you so." We just showed Mom that we loved her and that we were there for her. We helped her pick up the pieces and start over. We managed the trust responsibly, ensuring that Mom was financially secure for the rest of her life. We also made sure that some of Dad's legacy would be preserved for future generations, just as he had wanted. Mom eventually came around. She apologized to Elizabeth and me for her behavior. She admitted that we had been right about Richard and that we had saved her from making an even bigger mistake. She thanked us for protecting her and for protecting Dad's memory. It wasn't easy. It was a long and painful journey. But in the end, our family was stronger for it. We learned a lot about ourselves, about each other, and about the power of family. The life lesson here, Reddit, is to be wary of sudden changes and new people who appear out of nowhere, especially after a major life event like losing a loved one. And always trust your gut instinct. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And sometimes you have to take drastic action, even against your own family, to protect those you love and what's rightfully yours. Family is worth fighting for, even when it's messy and complicated. And in the end, family is what truly matters. Thoughts. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more shocking real-life stories happening around you.